Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is Malcolm X, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about Malcolm X and related matters the chairperson of the Africana Studies Department at Tennessee State University, Dr. AAl-Hadid. And of course, Dr. Al-Hadid, let me welcome you to the show this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Haynes. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
And Dr. Al-Hadid, what can we say in reference to what you've already given us? Everything from Marcus Garvey to Africans in the New World, historical black colleges, just a whole number of just very interesting and important pieces of information. And we know that what you will give us today in reference to Malcolm X will equal any of that you've already given us. And so let's start off by perhaps having you to talk about your background, your education, and some of the things that you've been involved in for those few members of our audience who might not have had an opportunity to see any of the 12 or 13 different shows that you've given us. So let's start off and then we'll talk about Malcolm X.
Well, first of all, I was born in Montgomery, Alabama. I went to George Washington High School and Alabama State University, where I received a bachelor's of sociology and also had a strong emphasis in psychology. I left the Deep South and went out on the West Coast to California, where I received a doctorate in sociology at the University of California in Santa Barbara. While studying there as a graduate student, I had an opportunity to go to Nairobi, Kenya. And it was there in Nairobi, Kenya in 1969 that I converted to the religion of Islam. And I also made the pilgrimage 6 months later, went to Mecca. Much of this was influenced by reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. So after I got my worldview and my formal education together, I then started looking for a job.
Okay.
And then, of course, I interviewed at Tennessee State University, Fisk, Meharry, and a few other places, and I settled on Tennessee State University. Been at TSU for a long time. I started in the sociology department. Then in 1994, we created the Department of Africana Studies. And since 1994, I have served for the last 13 years as chair of the Department of Africana Studies, Tennessee State University. Very good.
You know, Dr. Al-Hadid, when we talk about Malcolm X, I think that many people, and especially younger people, might not understand exactly who this individual was. And what we'd like to do today is for you to not only talk about Malcolm X, but to give us a little background information in reference to who he was and other information that you think that we ought to be interested in.
Well, as I said earlier, my interest in Malcolm started by reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. I think I must have read it about 7 times. And that was what inspired me, you know, to become a Muslim. In terms of Malcolm, here's a man born 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska, in the Midwest, just before the Great Depression. And then as a result of that, you know, his parents were followers of Marcus Garvey. We've talked about Garvey in an earlier show. And while he was growing up there in Omaha, Nebraska, because of the advocacy of his father, the family was often attacked by the Ku Klux Klan. And so when we get to, say, 1931, he's about 6 years old. Some say he was in kindergarten, maybe, you know, first grade. His father was killed, assassinated by the Klan. And he and his father were very close, and obviously that had a very traumatic effect on him. And then as he grew older and went to the 7th or 8th grade, around age 14, his mother had a nervous breakdown, and then she was committed to the Kalamazoo Mental Hospital in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And at that time, he just started losing all interest in school. He dropped out. He was committed to a number of foster homes and juvenile detention homes. So I think that was the thing that started him to drift into a world of juvenile delinquency. His oldest sister, by his father's first wife, Daisy Mae Little, saw him and then decided to take him from Michigan to Boston, where he went to Roxborough, which is like the black, you know, suburban area of Boston. And from that point, that was when he started to go into the world of crime. I think it's important that maybe we should tell the audience who Malcolm's father was.
Yeah.
His father's name was Reverend Earl Little, and his mother was Louisa Little, who was from Grenada. Okay, and so this older sister, by the first marriage, kept reminding him of the father and the commitment to the philosopher Marcus Garvey. Now, the thing that tipped the scale for Malcolm, of course, his father's killed by the Klan when he's 6 years old. His mother's committed to a mental institution by age 14. And the thing that tipped the scale in terms of him leaving grade school was that he told his teacher that he wanted to be a lawyer.
Let's break here for this first commercial break, Doctor, and then we'll pick up at this particular point. So we'll be back with you following this short commercial break. Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Al-Hadid, the chairperson of the Africana Studies Department at Tennessee State University, and the topic is Malcolm X. Doctor, let's continue that conversation that I so abruptly interrupted during our first segment here. Let's continue that.
Well, our subject here is Malcolm Little. That was his name. And so when he went to Boston, that's when he sort of got involved in crime. Then, of course, he went to New York, where he really got involved in the underworld. And he became a thief. He had a burglary ring. He also was a pimp, a hustler. And so finally, in 1946, he got arrested and was sentenced to prison for 10 years. He actually served 6.5 years of his prison term. But while in prison in Massachusetts, he was visited by some members of his family, and they started telling him about the Nation of Islam. And about Elijah Muhammad and Master Farad Muhammad. And so because of the experiences he had had with crime and also his background growing up within the Marcus Garvey family, he started to listen. But now at first he wasn't too much interested in religion. So when his brother approached him, he told him that, Malcolm, I know a way that you can get out of prison. And so he just thought it was as being a hustler, he thought it was some kind of scam. So he told him to stop eating pork, stop smoking cigarettes, and stop using profanity. And he said, that's all? He said, yeah, that's all you need to do. And so he didn't know at the time that he was being preconditioned for a religious conversion. And so he stopped doing that, and people started looking at him differently. And so over time, he became a model prisoner. And also he started to study the teachings of the Nation of Islam. When he was told that the white man was the devil, which he had no problem in believing, because after all, his father had been killed by the white folks, the Klan. He had 2 uncles or 3 uncles that had been killed by the Klan. His mother had been committed to an insane asylum by white folks. And also the fact that when he was arrested, he was involved with 2 white women, and they were used as sort of go-betweens. They would go to homes, case the homes, and then report back to him. And then he and his associates would go and break in the home when the family wasn't at home. So he put, 1 and 1 = 2. He figured it all out. Well, these are the people that are responsible for me being in prison, so I know they got to be devils. But one thing that he never could digest was that the white man was, that the black man rather was God. He couldn't quite fathom that in his mind, but he did readily accept the fact that the white man was the devil. So when he got out of prison in 1952, then he went to Detroit with his brother. He was on parole because he only served 6.5 years out of the 10-year sentence that he was given. So once he met Elijah Muhammad started to teach him. So in a very short period of time, I'd say about 2 years, he became the minister of the temple in Harlem, Temple number 7. And shortly after that, he became the national spokesperson for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Now, at the time that he received these teachings of Islam, he did not know, did not realize that these teachings were not exactly what Islam was all about. And in order to show the difference, let me just tell the audience what true Islam is. Well, first of all, Islam means total submission to the will of Allah. A person who accepts this becomes a Muslim. The proper name for God is Allah, and the holy text of the Muslims is the Quran. And there are 5 basic beliefs that you must have. First of all, that there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is last and final messenger. You must also pray 5 times a day, give 2.5% of your wealth in charity, and then you should also fast during the month of Ramadan. And as fate would have it, we are now trying to sight the new moon to begin the fasting of Ramadan at this very moment. Ramadan here will start either Saturday or Sunday. Then finally, we have the pilgrimage to Mecca, which comes in the last month of the Islamic calendar, which is the month of Hajj. And that was the thing that when Malcolm made the pilgrimage to Mecca, that allowed him to see clearly the difference between the type of Islam he was taught and Islam that he eventually came to accept as true Islam or mainstream Islam. But as things developed, Malcolm became very popular. As a matter of fact, as early as 1958, he traveled abroad to Sudan, to Egypt, and to Turkey, and he had a chance to see true Islam as early as 1958. So when he came back, he had a different kind of perspective on Islam in contrast to what he had been taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So as things kept unraveling, people inside of the Nation of Islam became somewhat jealous of him. And they started taking his articles out of the Muhammad Speaks newspaper. And, you know, the jealousy and animosity started to develop. So eventually, they tried to figure out some way to get him out of the Nation of Islam. And the incident that he used as a pretext of getting him out of the Nation of Islam was when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. Elijah Muhammad sent an executive order for none of his ministers to say anything about the incident. So Malcolm, after giving a speech, inadvertently said that the assassination of Kennedy was a case of the chickens coming home to roost. And what did he want to say that?
I remember that statement. I remember.
He made that statement, and then initially he was suspended from the Nation of Islam for 90 days. But he eventually realized that he was not going to be admitted back into the Nation of Islam. So he then went to the Islamic Center in Brooklyn, New York, and there at the Islamic Center, he became a true and proper Muslim. And once he converted in 1964, he then made arrangements to go to Mecca so that he could really see the entire Muslim world and travel throughout the Muslim world. And so the Malcolm that left the Nation of Islam in 1964, around March of '64, and the one that went to Mecca in